Welcome to Circuit 42.
Circuit 42.
The one-stop location for all things geek. This episode is brought to you by our sponsors, Dragon's Lair San Antonio and Gotham Newsstand. Sit back, relax, and most importantly, enjoy another episode of Circuit 42.
Circuit 42.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of Pass the Popcorn. I am Ian McIntosh, your unknown and sadly lost on the internet host. A place where we all eventually fester and just go off into the winds of obscurity. Because our names do not end in Pi or Markiplier. And I am here with my special guest, Ben Rock. Badass.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty good. Now, Ben, for those who don't know, those 5 people on the internet who are like, what is a Ben Rock? Who are you? Huh?
I think it's vastly more than 5 people. I'm probably best known as the production designer and backstory creator of the Blair Witch Project. Or I was one of the people who wrote the backstory, but I designed the iconic stick man, and I was one of the guys 20 years ago wearing camouflage, running around the woods, harassing Heather, Mike, and Josh.
So I gotta ask, because everybody talks when the movie got mainstream media coverage back in the day. Everyone was talking about, we've got this camera, and they have this camera, and then they returned the camera after they made a movie. But obviously, there's a lot more to that, and it really seemed like a lot of people were simplifying it because it was, I hate to say, it was the '90s, and people's attention spans seemed to be at their weakest.
I'd say that attention spans are even weaker now. We're all, so busy watching 1-minute videos on Snapchat or 10 seconds or whatever. It's all ephemeral. Well, first of all, as far as the camera thing goes, we had 2 cameras. One for us back at base camp, also as a backup for them, and one that they were using in the field. And when the project was over, I bought the one that they used in the field. I still own it.
That is really cool.
Yeah, I bought it because I just wanted a video camera, and they'd propped it to make it look, or we had propped it to make it look like it had been under a house for 3 years. And I didn't care. I just wanted a video camera, so it was an analog high-8 camera, and they sold it to me, I think, for $250. And currently, if anyone's in Seattle, there's a museum in Seattle. It's an awesome museum, and you shouldn't just go there to see the Blair Witch camera, but it's called the EMP Museum, and that's where the camera is.
So, something I have to ask. Now, were you there from the very beginning? Like, how did you get involved in the whole movie?
I was around almost from the very, very beginning. So I went to the university. I'll try and make this as short as possible. But I went to the University of Central Florida in Orlando. All of the principal people from the Blair Witch Project basically went there. So that was the 2 co-directors, Ed Sanchez and Dan Myrick, the 2 producers, Greg Hale and Rob Cowie, and the co-producer Mike Manello, and myself all went there. And even though Neil Fredericks, who was the DP, he didn't go there. But he was around a lot. He'd gone to I think Towson, and had moved to Orlando to kind of hang out with Ed and shoot Ed's films. He and Ed were really good friends. And so in 1996, I had just graduated from college, and Greg Hale, the producer, lived about a block away from me, and we were really good friends. We'd gone to 2 different film programs together. And I was hanging out at his house one night, and he said, have you ever heard of the Blair Witch? And he knows that I'm I read the Fortean Times, and I read a lot of folklore, and I'm a nerd for a good ghost story. And so when he said Blair Witch, I was like, do you mean the Bell Witch? And there's a famous ghost story in Adams, Tennessee called the Bell Witch, rather. And he's like, no, the Blair Witch. And I was like, no. And then he kind of gave me, at that time, the mythology wasn't very polished, but kind of the broad strokes of it, and I was way into it because that's the kind of thing that I was into. And then he said, Ed Sanchez, right? And I vaguely knew Ed. Ed was 2 years ahead of me at UCF, but I knew who he was, and I knew he was from Maryland. And he said Ed has a couple of friends that he went to community college with before he went to UCF that were making a documentary, and they disappeared. And I'm like, no way. And then he's like, well, here's the crazy part. Like last year, their footage turned up under the foundation of an old house. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And then he said, yeah, we're gonna analyze all this footage. And I mean, like, I was dead serious. I was like, you guys are all gonna die. And then when he stopped laughing, he told me what I had just fallen for, and I sort of feel like I fell for the same pitch that everyone else later on. Like, I kind of took that pitch and helped them refine it a bit, and that was the pitch that went out to moviegoers, some 3 years later when the actual movie came out. But we were shooting it a year later. But the first thing they had me do was go through and kind of write up the mythology, and I created what you would call kind of a pitch deck today, or a rip reel, or a pitch tape. I wrote it, so I named all the historical characters, put real dates on it, kind of set it in history, made it sound like folklore as best as I could. Spent a lot of time at the library because Wikipedia didn't exist yet, and that was that. What happened was they'd take it. There was a guy named John Pearson, and John Pearson is kind of a famous indie film figure from the 90s. He discovered like Kevin Smith and Michael Moore and Richard Linklater and all these people.
Yeah.
And he had a show on IFC called Split Screen, and he was shooting an episode of Split Screen at the Florida Film Festival in Orlando. And Mike Minello, the co-producer of Blair Witch, which hadn't been made yet, but he was the marketing director at the Enzian, which sponsored the Florida Film Festival, and he recommended his good friend Daniel Myrick to be John's cameraman. And so Dan went and shot for him for like 4 or 5 days, and at the end of it, he said, "Hey, I'm working on this independent film pitch. Would you mind looking at this?" And he gives him a tape. John Pearson goes back to New York, like a few weeks go by, and then he called up Dan, and he's like, "You have this footage? What's on this footage? I have to see what's on this footage." And we were off to the races. So they actually screened the tape that I wrote, I think just with almost no bells and whistles, as a segment of Split Screen, and then they paid us to make another segment of Split Screen, and that one, between the two, we went and shot the movie. And so a sizable chunk of the budget for the actual movie, and I don't think a lot of people know about this, but a sizable chunk of our budget was literally the segment fee for 2 fees of Split Screen.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting. Like, a lot of people will hear this now. People who maybe it kind of makes me feel old that there are people of this generation watching it now, being like, "Oh yeah, that old movie," and like, how people fall for that. And it's like, first off, minus like something like Cannibal Holocaust, there really weren't any other movies like that, and the marketing, well, much like Cannibal Holocaust, the marketing was so tight to the point where a lot of there's like, I may be wrong, but weren't the actors actually told to lie low for a little while after the movie was done?
They were. I distinctly remember, like, the movie was either already out or about to come out in theaters, and I was at the Fangoria Weekend of Horrors in Pasadena, and I was there with the marketing people from Artisan, and I said, "Why aren't Heather, Mike, and Josh here?" And the woman from marketing was like, "We're not trying to emphasize that they're all still alive." And actually, this is hysterical to me to this day. Do you remember who Art Bell was, or is? He's not dead.
I don't remember off the top of my head.
So Art Bell had a radio an AM radio show called Coast to Coast that was like a less vitriolic Alex Jones kind of a show. Like, it was all conspiracies and UFOs and Men in Black and stuff like that, right? Yeah. And one of the TV specials that I'd done for Blair Witch, I tried to get him to be on it, and he had passed. But he said, "Will you come on my show?" And I was like, "Absolutely. I'm not going to turn down, being on Coast to Coast with Art Bell." And so when he got me on his show, the first thing he asked me was, "So does anyone know what happened to these 3 kids?" And I was like, "They're actors. They're all living in LA now, I think." And he thought it was all real, which I think says a lot about conspiracy-minded folks.
Yep.
But it was like, at that point, I think they had already been on the cover of Newsweek.
I think as long as you don't end up in a court in Italy having to explain how you did the effects for the movie, you should be okay. And for
No.
those who don't know what we're talking about, in the movie Cannibal Holocaust, people literally thought they had killed the actors, and the effects were so realistic that they had to go to court and be like, yes, the actors are alive. Here's how we did the effects for the movie.
Well, what's funny is, like, with Cannibal Holocaust, I think the reason that happened is a lot of the effects in Cannibal Holocaust look like, cheap Italian horror movie effects of the early 80s, which is what it was. And then there was one dead body that absolutely looked so goddamn real that people couldn't believe it. And I think and it was a stage magic trick. Like, it looked real because it was a real person. They just weren't injured.
So I wanted to talk to you about something. Like, when the movie first came out, there was a special on Sci-Fi Channel that you worked on.
Correct.
Called Curse of the Blair Witch. Now, the great thing about this is that they released this around the same time as the movie. And
yeah, it was like 2 weeks before it came out.
And the funny thing is, a lot of people actually liked it more, which is interesting because it seems like I've talked to a lot of people who love both of them, but I've talked to some people there's a friend of mine, a podcaster, well, he doesn't call himself a podcaster. He's a online radio host named Josh Hadley, and he actually is one of the people I know who has outright said that he actually thought it was more impressive and creepier than the movie itself.
That's funny.
So, was that just something that you were taught? Was that just something that Sci-Fi approached you? How did that work?
The way that the Sci-Fi Channel came about, and really the person who knows probably more than anyone is Mike Manello, who was the co-producer on Blair Witch. But what basically happened was I had moved to L.A. Like, I actually arrived in L.A. the day Blair Witch was picked up at Sundance, and the rest of them all stayed in Orlando and had an office. And the company was Haxon Films. And as the movie was kind of getting closer to opening and buzz was building, all that stuff, they were being wined and dined, and they went to Cannes, and I think Ed and Dan probably would have written that special if they'd been around, but they weren't. And so, because they were at Cannes and getting, getting the major star treatment that they were getting at the time. And so they called me and asked me if I would be willing to write it because I knew the mythology, because I created most of the mythology. And I was like, you mean I can quit this job answering telephones in the San Fernando Valley? You got it. And so basically I went home, and I think part of the reason that it comes across as legitimate as it does has to do with the way that we wrote it, which is I wrote a full script, just like you would write any script, but like for the interview sections, I would just kind of put it all in italics, and it would be like, he talks about blah, blah, blah. And we knew the experts that we wanted to have, and so what I did was I created a biography for each expert that they memorized. And so when they were auditioning people, they would just give them this 1-2-page bio, and just the audition was an interview. And a lot of the people they brought in weren't even actors. They were, like the guy who plays the college professor was a real college professor. And a lot, I mean, some were actors, but a lot of them weren't. But they were just kind of given this story to memorize, and then just kind of be able to extemporaneously tell it back when they're prompted in an interview to react. And I used that because I did 2 other Blair Witch specials, and I also did a TV special for the first Hellboy movie for FX. And we used this technique on all of them, and it really does work really well. It takes a lot of pre-writing because you have to come up with like a 2-page character bio for every character that you're going to interview. But then the interview is just an interview, and they're just like, you get actors who can come across like they're speaking extemporaneously and just telling you whatever off the top of their head, and so I feel like that lent a lot of authenticity to all the interviews. Then they used some of our footage and some footage that had actually been created for the original Blair Witch, like the Rustin Parr footage, the serial killer from the 1940s. Yeah. That was originally going to be part of the actual movie, and like none of the stuff that was created, we called it phase 1 and phase 2 of the original movie. So the stuff with Heather, Mike, and Josh in the woods, that was phase 1. Phase 2 was going to be a lot of the supporting material that was going to be intercut with it, and none of it worked when they started intercutting it with the movie. It just looked completely inauthentic compared to what Heather, Mike, and Josh did. But like some of it, like that Rustin Parr footage, comes across as very authentic because the guy who plays Rustin Parr, his name is Frank Pastor, I think is probably actually schizophrenic. Like he was a little touched. or a lot touched. Like they weren't able to find him a year later. Like nobody knows what the hell happened to that guy.
Oh.
True story. In a sense, not in a sense. It is tragic. It's horrible, but it's like he just vanished off the face of the earth. But he was like Haxon used to be at this house in downtown Orlando, and he, I think, was like their gardener, and they just thought he was weird and asked him if he would do that, and he did it. And then they couldn't track him down. They wanted to put him in Blair Witch 2, and they couldn't even find him. That was like a year later. But that stuff came across as authentic. So some of that stuff got repurposed and used in Curse, but all of the interview stuff was new stuff that we had created. And I love it when people really buy it, because to me, all that Curse is kind of a celebration of the mythology, most of which was the stuff I was asked to create in the first place. And then in Curse, I took what was a very basic outline and then like went crazy deep into it, like really deep. Added a lot of new stuff.
I gotta say, regarding Rustin Parr, brain fart. Yeah, Rustin Parr. I remember the PC games that actually came out right around the same time, and how, well, I'm not gonna lie, the game design could have been a little bit better. I really did like the concepts, and I love how we actually Now, I mean, you can tell me in regards to that. Were these planned to be this way, or did this all kind of stem from ideas directly, or was there always the idea, or were you guys always thinking about the rest of the history and how?
So here's the thing. The short answer is no. Like when we were making the movie, the idea of making PC video games was, that would have been science fiction to us. The idea that it was gonna, we were blown away. Honestly, that it got into Sundance, that it got picked up at Sundance. Like every step of it was just like a fantasy come true. Like all of it is like kind of like what you sit around and dream about when you're in film school, and then it all happened. None of us were game designers or anything like that. None of us knew how to do that. But Rob Cowie, who was one of the producers, hooked me up with Artisan and had me because I'd created so much of the mythology. They had me for about a year or two as a consultant. And it wasn't just the video games. There were the video games. There were a series of young adult novels that were created. There were 2 TV specials that I wrote and directed myself. And then there were a couple of other books, most of which Dave Stern wrote. And I was a consultant on all of them. So I had to read the video game scripts. I didn't even really know how to read a video game script at the time. I had to learn. And some of it, they created a language that was sort of based on runes, and I always get a little uppity when people talk about runes in this, because there's no runes in the movie. But they created a thing called Twana that was sort of like a Native American rune mashup somehow. And I thought it was kind of cool. And I tried to lace references, when I made the Burkitsville 7 for Showtime, I laced references to stuff that was in the video game into the script for that. Like, for instance, there was a Rustin Parr thing, quote or something where it was some plot point in the game where he says "never given" or the words are given, never given, and I put that into the Burkitsville 7 very intentionally, because I thought it was kind of cool, and I like it when these things, they don't have to match up perfectly, and in fact they shouldn't match up perfectly because it's folklore. And folklore shouldn't be like, there isn't like a canon version of, the guy with the hook hand story. Like, it's folklore. So they should all be intentionally a little different, but I like it where there are like overlap points or points where stuff matches up. So I tried to do that. And, even like in reading the young adult novels, and also, by the way, Blair Witch 2, which I consulted on, but really I think the only thing I was able to successfully get through to them was to not set it in Baltimore. That was just sort of my job. I don't know. I think I just kind of lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Blair Witch 2 is just like, it's one of those movies like a lot of people. Perfect example of if they had just left it well enough alone and let the people behind it tell the story. Because that's become kind of like a lot of people now know because of like different people have really gone into it, just how good and interesting that could have been And it's like, no, we've got to change everything because shut up.
Yeah, well, this is my opinion, obviously, and I don't mean to say anything negative about Joe Berlinger, because I think Joe Berlinger is like one of the finest living filmmakers today and just one of the most amazing documentarians. And if you've seen any of the Paradise Lost movies, the West Memphis Three, like those three guys are alive in part because of Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky and the films that they made. I mean, I think that they're certified geniuses and awesome. I think that nobody could have made a really good movie in the environment that Blair Witch 2 is made in, and a big part of it was that the first one was made with much love and a lot of time went into it, and it was like a little handcrafted thing, whether you loved it or hated it. We took no resources and cobbled them together and made a movie that was conceived actually in film school, but like in earnest kind of got going in 1996, got shot in 1997, got finished in, like 1998, 1999. It's like a lot of time went into everything that happens in that movie, a lot of work. And then Blair Witch 2 got greenlit in like January of 2000, and it was in theaters in October of 2000. Like it really didn't have a chance to be any good, even though Joe Berlinger, I think, is an amazing documentarian. I think he needs he needs the same amount of time that any other like narrative filmmaker would need to make a good narrative film. You don't hear about any great movie being like cranked out in 9 months, which is what happened there. And part of that was that, like the business environment around Artisan at the time, they excuse me, like they wanted to make an IPO and they wanted to do it the next year. I think that if you said to them, well, you can make 10 million or whatever, I don't know how much they were hoping to make. I'm sure it was way more than 10 million. You can make $1 billion this year, or you can make $1 billion next year. Most of us would be like, I'll take it this year, please. And I think that was their thinking, is they needed to show the world that they could make a hit movie, not just acquire one at a film festival, which is, like most of their well-known movies up until that point, like The Cruise and Pi, those were acquisitions. Those weren't movies that they had made. And Blair Witch was another one. They wanted to prove that they could make a hit movie and that they knew how to do it. And the problem is that they didn't know how to do it. And I think they leaned on people who were like, I worked with all these people and they were really honest to God, wonderful people. I don't have a single bad thing to say about any individual person at Artisan. I just think that they just had their foot on the gas pedal. And I think that they maybe cynically thought that they could crank out a sequel. And also what Ed and Dan wanted to do, like, did you see The Witch?
Yeah.
It was, what Ed and Dan wanted to do was a lot like that. And when I saw The Witch, I'm like, to me, The Witch is a masterpiece. Like, I love The Witch.
I know.
I saw it twice in the theater and bought the Blu-ray.
It's so good. Like,
yeah.
A24, we need, I would say we need 5 more studios like that, but then we wouldn't have anything nearly as interesting, if that makes sense.
Well, we did have 5, like in the 90s, you did have that.
Oh, I know.
Had, like, Miramax and October and Artisan, and, there were a lot of companies that were doing stuff. Like, in the 90s, there was real money in making independent films, and then they all got bought out by the studios, and then the studios eventually closed down those divisions and focused on what they really want to do, which is, 5 superhero movies a day. But yeah, so when I saw The Witch, though, I was like, this is what Ed and Dan intended to make, was like this. And I flatter any of us to say that we could have made something that was as nuanced and brilliant as The Witch. Like, it's such a great film. But that was what they wanted to do. At the time, that would have cost a lot more money. I think that they were estimating it was going to cost like $20 million. And these guys, it is a leap to go from your biggest budget being $25,000 to, $20 million. And I don't think Artisan, we'd had some meetings about possibly putting together the origin story. That's what it would have been. It would have been like the story of Ellie Kedward, who is the Blair Witch in the mythology, and what happens in Blair Township, and kind of the start of the legend. And I just don't think that they were interested in that. And frankly, Lionsgate, when they released the movie Blair Witch last year, Adam Wingard, who's a filmmaker whose work I adore, him and Simon Barrett are amazing horror filmmakers. I don't know because I haven't talked to them about it, but I do feel like Lionsgate wanted to basically reboot Blair Witch by practically remaking Blair Witch, and it's a different world, and I think that the fans did show up. I just don't think that there are that many hardcore Blair Witch fans who are so excited to see exactly that they could make a hit. But anyway, that was Blair Witch 2 to me. Was they thought they could crank out a hit. It was a weird place to be around Artisan at that time, and I was working for them, pretty much from from early 2000 through probably the beginning of 2001, and then a year or two after that they stopped making movies because they couldn't make a hit. I shouldn't say they couldn't. They just never did. Maybe they could have. Who knows? Now,
correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't Artisan eventually become Lionsgate, or how did that work?
Lionsgate bought out Artisan's library. Basically, they bought it. So Lionsgate owns Blair Witch now, and given that the Blair Witch reboot, I don't think did the kind of box office they were hoping for. I'm not bullish that there's going to be another Blair Witch reboot anytime soon, which is too bad. Because honestly, I actually really liked what Adam and Simon did, but the audience is never wrong.
The funny thing is how you mentioned Artisan trying to turn this into a franchise, just crank out movies that they could say they made and get all this money out of them. I kept thinking about Saw.
Yeah,
and it is funny that even though not technically the same studio, but that's pretty much what happened. They took a franchise and kept cranking out to the point where it just became garbage. And now you had some great ideas, and thankfully with people like James Wan, you had good careers that came out of that.
Yeah.
But
Darren Lynn Bousman too.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I saw how quickly they'd cranked out Saw 2, I'm like, here we go again. And then Saw 2 is a huge hit. And another franchise that I predicted would go down the same route, incorrectly predicted, was Paranormal Activity. But right around the time the second Paranormal Activity movie was coming out, I was actually working for Akiva Goldsman, who was one of the producers on that. I was working on, it's a longer story, but I was a consultant on the version of The Dark Tower that didn't get made, but it was when Ron Howard was going to direct it, and Akiva Goldsman was writing the script. But Paranormal Activity 2 came out at that time, and Akiva told me, like, they had watched Blair Witch 2 and used it as a cautionary tale before they made Paranormal 2. Like, they very clearly studied what could go wrong if you make a Blair Witch 2 kind of thing. But, the thing about Blair Witch 2 is I think Joe Berlinger was, on paper, a great choice to make that movie, but he didn't like the first movie. And I think, like, if you hate Star Wars, don't direct The Empire Strikes Back. I think it's a bad way to go. And I heard a story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, that supposedly Jeff Donovan, when he went into audition for Blair Witch 2, they asked him what he thought of the Blair Witch Project, and he was like, I effing hated it. And it's like,
What?
I mean, there's something kind of punk rock about that, I guess. But, I wrote, I think it was like an 8-part piece for Dread Central last year when Blair Witch was coming out, about my whole experience with this. And about halfway through writing it, like probably when I got to the part where we were actually making the movie, in my story, I realized this ends badly. Like, there's no real positive spin. Now, I was writing it before the reboot came out, and that was how I found some positive spin. Like, I love Adam Wingard and Simon Barrett's work. I really have high expectations and hope that the Blair Witch reboot is everything that I keep hearing it is. But it was like, I just saw that it was there was no way for me to put a happy ending on it, because sort of the ending of the story to me was Artisan, flopping with this movie and then going out of business, basically.
Now, we talk about directors getting people who are working on projects who hate the project, and how that doesn't make any sense, and how it always spells the end for somebody or something. You've heard of the director Stuart Baird?
I have not. No, who is that?
Stuart Baird is interesting, because if I told you some of the stuff he'd worked on, you'll be like, holy shit, that's pretty awesome. Skyfall, Casino Royale, Die Hard, Lethal Weapon, all these big titles. And as a director, he's directed 3 movies. The last movie was Star Trek Nemesis.
Uh-huh.
He told the cast and crew about how he hated the franchise, but the only reason he was there was because he was contracted. I was talking to Will Wheaton about 10 years ago, and he said that apparently he was just insulting people. Like, he would constantly say that he was there on a contract, he just wanted to make the movie and get it done, and blah, blah, blah. And you take a movie that basically sunk a franchise for 7 years.
Yeah, it hurts my heart.
Career.
It hurts my heart. Like, I've done second unit for a number of people, and I worked on a project that I can't actually talk about, but you probably would be into it. But I literally can't. I'm NDA'd within an inch of my life. Can't say what it was. But it was something that there is a fan base for. And when I was working on it, it's like anything else. It's the middle of the night. You're exhausted. You want to finish up your thing and go home. Whatever. And I'm doing second unit, and second unit could be a phone-it-in position. It never really is for me. But whenever I've done it, I've always to me, it's like it's an opportunity to get super focused. But so we're shooting this stuff in the middle of the woods, and like what kept me going was knowing that there's this rabid fan base. That if this is done in a manner that respects what the fan base wants, that what we're making is just fucking catnip for them. And which isn't to say that everything on Earth is fan service, and you have to tell your story, you have to make your movie, you have to do it with your own integrity, whatever that is for each individual person. And I'm not saying that I've never phoned in anything in my life, but when I'm on set shooting something, it's like trying to think about like what engages the fans. Like I remember hearing that on the reboot, I forget who it was who told me, or maybe it was an interview, the remake that they did of A Nightmare on Elm Street, and they asked, it was the same thing that you're talking about. They asked the director about it. They asked him if he was a fan, and I think that, like, look, I'm not a romantic comedy guy, but if they asked me to reboot You've Got Mail and they're paying me to do it, and they're putting their trust in me, and they say, "Are you a fan of You've Got Mail?" I'm going to be like, man, I grew up on Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. I'm going to find some goddamn angle to make the people who love that material think that it's in good hands, because if the fans start losing faith, it ruins it. And on A Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, supposedly the director said, "No, man, I'm just trying to get into features." It's like, nobody cares about your directing career, friend. They're hoping that they want to hear that you're a fan of something about this movie. Surely there was something about this material you liked, because I can tell you that I know 20 horror filmmakers who are qualified to make that movie, who would have murdered their uncle to direct A Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, and I'm one of them. And to take any opportunity like that and wipe your ass with it in a public way, that's shitty. I mean, like, you go home, you hate your job, you complain to your spouse about it, beat your dog. Don't tell the fans. Like, it's just an obnoxious thing to do. And I feel like, with Blair Witch 2, it wasn't that, like, Berlinger in a lot of interviews would say how angry he was that Blair Witch, the first Blair Witch, is presented as a documentary because it's all shaky cam, and to him as a documentarian, like, and I know this is just one of the things he said, like, he always strove to make it look like a regular feature, and his documentaries are beautiful. I'm not going to deny that, but it's like, I like, you can't say that, like, one style of documentary or one style is the right way to do it. And anyway, I mean, like, I hope I'm not shitting on Joe Berlinger, because I truly have nothing but respect for the man, and he was very nice to me. And I think his documentaries are consequential, which is more than most people can ever say about their films.
You're definitely not, man. Like, here's the thing, just talking to you, it also shows the ways of two different ways to do things, and at the same time, everyone does have a style, and do have various styles of various movies. By the way, funny you mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street, because I remember me and my friends, we were looking around at different movies and directors and everything. The director of that movie is Samuel Bayer.
Yeah.
We thought it was hilarious, because if you look at his IMDb, nothing but music videos.
He directed It Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is like one of my favorite music videos of all time.
But here's the funny thing. Not a single movie credit after Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, it didn't work. Well, the movie didn't do that well.
It's like, don't be an asshole, and you might have a decent movie career.
I think don't be an asshole is just a good rule in life, and that's not to say that everyone isn't going to be an asshole sometimes, but when you realize you're being an asshole, stop being an asshole.
Exactly. That is the lesson that people should take if they take anything from the show. Don't be an asshole. Stop being an asshole.
Well, and I mean, like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to direct another feature. I sure hope I do. But it's like when I was doing the feature that I directed, I never took it for granted. It was a lot of work. It was very stressful. I did lose my cool at people. When I did, I would apologize. But it was stressful, hard work because we were all trying to make a movie that was as good as we could possibly make it under, let's say, less than ideal circumstances.
See, now I'm curious.
Mm-hmm.
Because you talk about the less than ideal circumstances. Like, what happened?
Oh, it's not like anything terrible happened. I knew it. I went into it with my eyes open. Much like I think Joe Berlinger went into Blair Witch 2 with his eyes open.
I thought you were saying Rustin Parr came back.
No. So the movie I'm talking about is Alien Raiders, not Blair Witch.
Yeah, I know.
And Alien Raiders, we had to make it in 15 days. And the script I was given was like wall-to-wall action, which is not something you can do in 15 days. And it had to be drastically rewritten. And the writer who had turned in that draft, David Simpkins, he was done with his commitment, and his wife was about to give birth to twins, so he wasn't available. And so a new writer, who's a dear friend of mine, Julia Fair, came on board to do the rewrite, but I only had her for 3 weeks because the Writers Guild strike started. So we had about 3 weeks to figure out how to take this epic monster of a movie that David had created and pare it down to something that we could make in 15 days. And that was like starting from the moment I was hired, I knew 6 weeks later I was going to be standing on set directing this movie, and I was going to have to do it in 15 days, and I was going to have to do it with this given budget, and it was just a massive challenge. So it's not like Klaus Kinski was cast in it and yelled at the crew or anything. Everybody worked their asses off on that thing. It's just 15 days is no way to make a movie that's supposed to be lots and lots of action. It's really hard to do. And, my hat's off, frankly, to companies like The Asylum that can somehow figure out a way to do that part of it right. Like they can get all the action into lots of shark action. I don't know how they do it,
Many NATOs, sir. Many NATOs.
All the NATOs of the sharks.
The funny thing is, my girlfriend, she's still going to be wanting me to watch all the Sharknado movies. And I've promised, and I've told her that we will find a way to literally do a Sharknado day and just watch all 4 Sharknado movies, because apparently there's a 4th one now.
Ugh.
And it's The Fourth Awakens.
Nah. Oh God. Hey man, good on them. They figured out a way to keep independent filmmaking. Weirdly, a guy that went to college with all of us who did Blair Witch is a guy named Mark Atkins, and he's made, I don't even want to think about how many movies for The Asylum. He has probably personally directed more than 10 of them, and then DP'd and edited even more than that.
The funny thing is, I legitimately do like one of the Asylum movies because I think it's so over the top that it's amazing, and that's Sherlock Holmes, because they managed to find a way to put in Sherlock Holmes, Iron Man armor, and
of course,
a dinosaur.
Oh, well,
And if I remember, I think one of the actors in it is actually from the show Sherlock. And it's like, did you trick him?
It's like you put the cruise sign on the same street you knew he was driving down and just diverted him.
It's like, hey, I think that's BBC over there. Ah, crap, it's the Asylum.
Well, I mean, like, look, people talk trash about the Asylum, but I know people who work for them, and they would, like, lay down on a train track for the Asylum. They love working there, so...
I think their movies are fun, man. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I like Transmorphers 2 better than Transformers 2, because it was shorter and had Bruce Boxleitner.
That is damning it with faint praise, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of the Transformers 2 is like one of the few movies that ever actually kind of offended me, and I'm hard to offend, I think.
Yeah, that whole movie I watched. I was literally forced to watch it in theaters twice.
Ugh.
I'm still friends with that person.
Yeah.
Mainly
Well-
because she has admitted that the movie is awful.
The Haxon guys came to town one time, and there's a theater in L.A. that they love going to called the ArcLight. It's a great theater.
Yeah.
And they were in town, and there was a new theater called the Landmark, and they had a 4K restoration of Dr. Strangelove, and I was trying to talk them into going to see it. But what they wanted to go see was Fantastic Four 2 Rise of the Silver Surfer.
What?
And I'd already seen it and really didn't like it. But because they're my friends and they don't live in town, I went and saw it with them. And they apologized and offered to repay my ticket. I'm like, no, I actually feel better making you feel guilty. Your guilt is worth more to me than, $12.
I had a point like that, and I think we'll be able to relate in this way. Blade Runner was playing for a special screening an hour after the movie Robots, but my parents, just really wanted to see Robots instead. And I was legitimately pissed. But I'm like, damn it, if I have to see Robots, I have to see Robots. Luckily, I got to see Blade Runner when they had the 4K restoration, so it kind of made up for it.
Sometimes you just got to take the bullet. You got to bite the bullet for your friends and family and see a movie you don't want. But yeah, no, I get it.
So,
and I
sorry,
I think of all the horror movies I dragged my father to as a kid, and I was actually thinking about it because my father hates horror movies, like just on a personal level. He just doesn't like them. And given that we're doing, I don't know when you're going to publish this, but we're doing this interview the day after George Romero passed away, and I was thinking about how when I was a kid, I convinced my dad to take me to see Creepshow, and he hated that movie every second of it. He hated, and to me, it's like one of my most beloved movie-going memories as a kid.
I am a huge Romero fan. I was a shock when I found out about that yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, and Wes Craven was like a year or so ago, and yeah, I mean, when this happens, I texted like a little bit with Adam Green and some other like horror guys who like Adam knew George Romero pretty well. I didn't know George all that well, but when I was in film school, the first film school I went to was a community college that was all technical, and they would bring in big deal filmmakers and have them shoot a film at that film school, right? Wow. And the second year they did it, which was the year after I finished, George Romero came there and made a film called Jacaranda Joe. But because I knew everybody, I would like come and hang around the set. And, I didn't get to know him at all, but I met him a bunch of times. But then his son Cameron went to Valencia the following year, and I got to know Cameron pretty well as well. And Cameron himself is a horror filmmaker. I don't know if you've seen any of his films.
I haven't, but I want to check it out now.
Yeah, Cameron's a really nice. I mean, I honestly haven't talked to him since college, but Cameron was a really nice guy.
I got to say, I got to meet George once, and that was at San Diego. It was 2007, and it was weird because you had San Diego Comic-Con, and there are all these people there, and I come by his table, and there's nobody there, and I'm like, wait, what? So I go to his table, and it was very brief, just talking to him. Just really nice guy. And
yeah.
The thing that I really respected about him, he was genuinely upset because apparently Fangoria, and it's funny when you say $40 for an autograph now, people will be like, oh, whatever. But he didn't. He hated the idea of having to charge that much, and apparently he told me that if he wasn't at the Fangoria table, he would not even bother.
Yeah, Adam Green. Adam Green goes to a lot of conventions, and Adam doesn't he refuses, I think, to charge for autographs because I think if you're in it for the fans, as people like Adam and I think people like George were or whatever, I feel like you just want to interact with those people. I mean, I'm not at the level where people want me to go to conventions and sign autographs, but when it does happen, I was working with somebody recently who was familiar with something that I'd done, and they were genuinely super excited to be working with me on this project because of the web series I do, 20 Seconds to Live. They were blown away. They were super excited, and I'm like, really? You don't realize sometimes you put this stuff out into the world, and you don't realize that it's truly impacting people. And there's a guy named Matt Blasi who every year does a Blair Witch experience, and people go to Seneca State Park and Patapsco State Park, and they don't camp out in the woods because I don't think the parks let them camp out. But he does a hike and takes them to all the main sites where we went, and to me it's kind of freaky as hell that I mean, because we made the movie 20 years ago. This October is when we shot the movie.
Yeah.
And the fact that this like jagoff thing that we all did with no money 20 years ago, that anyone still gives a shit, it blows my mind. But you talk to Matt Blasey, and like Matt is actually like writing a book about Blair Witch, and he's interviewing everybody who was ever involved with it. And it's like this thing is a very important thing to him, and you just don't. I mean, but that's like, you know, the stuff that I was a giant fan of when I was a kid. It was like Reanimator, and I've gotten to work with Stuart Gordon a few times, and it's like I never stopped geeking out about being in the same room with Stuart Gordon. The guy is one of my heroes, and I think that to him, like, he's proud of the work he did on Reanimator and whatnot, but you know, he's just some guy. Like he's a freaking genius, but he's just, you know, like, I don't think that one can go around being that impressed with oneself most of the time. And you know, to me, Stuart's one of the most impressive people I've ever met. You know, and you know, and somebody's making I mean, like, not just somebody, like Adam Wingard. 20 years from now, someone's going to be like going to where they shot You're Next, and you know, having a dinner party at that house all night. I mean, like, it perpetuates when something like really strikes your imagination, or really moves you, or really captures or captivates you. I mean, to me, that's the magic that we're all shooting for and almost never reach. Like, almost never, practically never. Almost nobody ever gets that far. People crap all over horror movies all the time because a lot of them are bad, and I always like to point out that most movies are bad. It's just sometimes when horror movies are bad, they were also low budget, so they seem even worse because you can see the seams a little bit better than, you know, when there's a bad Jennifer Aniston rom-com. No, you know, they still spent $70 million on it. But you know, I love knowing that the stuff can actually, you know, have an impact no matter what it is. The fact that Blair Witch had an impact still, like, you know, freaks me out, honestly.
I got to tell you, you mentioned, you've talked about all these. You've talked about, you know, visiting those locations, how much of an impact all this has made. My friend, it was his birthday a couple of days ago, and we decided to surprise him because we're in San Antonio, and we're about 2.5 hours out from the house where they shot Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, wow.
And here's the crazy part about it. The people who own it, apparently it was going to be torn down. And they found out about that this place was going to be torn down. And they actually told them, we'll buy the land from you so you won't destroy it, because this is a historical monument in our eyes. And they basically said, no, we're just gonna hell with it. It doesn't matter how much money you give us. There's no point. It's an eyesore. They took the entire house and they physically moved it to a new location.
Oh, wow.
And so you go there and it's set up the same way. Everything that's become this. It's kind of adorable because it's in this little small town in Texas, and it's this very, very quaint town. And you know that half the people who go there don't know what it is. Because there were these two old ladies that were talking about, these movies are so hideous nowadays. It's so intense. And we're just sitting there trying not to laugh while we're at the Texas Chainsaw House. And awesome. That was funny, though, because they overheard. And they overheard us, sitting there trying not to crack up. And they said, wait, what? You said this is the Texas Chainsaw House, right? I said, yeah, that's really neat. And it's like... It was the last I didn't want them to hear, because I thought, that would bother them and they may not come back or whatever. But I love that response. That's really neat. And now they're happy because they're eating at the Texas Chainsaw House.
They should open a barbecue restaurant there if they haven't already.
They don't have a barbecue restaurant, but the gas station, apparently you can actually... There's a thing where you can actually stay the night at that gas station from the first movie. And the bridge, you can actually, in Austin, the bridge from Texas Chainsaw 2, where they had the chainsaw scene, where, the big puppet.
Yeah.
You can actually that bridge is still open. You can still drive through there.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, the house at the end of Blair Witch apparently, like in 2003, 2004, I think, just fell over.
Oh, that's
yeah. It wasn't the most structurally stable thing I've ever been in my life, for sure. It was a little dangerous.
You probably should have told the actors that first, but you know what?
we were young, and well, I mean, like it wasn't. I probably spent more time in that house than anybody else, and you know, I'm lucky it didn't collapse while I was there. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty creepy looking. Like we didn't change. I probably spent more time on that house than anything else, but most of it was just getting rid of graffiti and, you know, doing things like getting kids to put handprints all over the walls and stuff.
I've heard about that. I always thought it was so creepy and cool. And the thing I wanted to ask about, speaking of, because you talked about going to the house, did they go back and reshoot a couple times at the house with the ending?
Yeah. Well, what happened was Artisan didn't like our ending. And so it was after Sundance, so it was probably in when the movie came out in '99. So it was probably, I want to say, I was already in LA. It was probably like February, March of '99. After they picked up the movie, but before we did Curse or any of that stuff, they had us go back and shoot and you can find them online. There's like 5 alternate endings. Each one more ridiculous than the last. So like one you go down and Mike Williams is like crucified on a giant stick man, and one you go down and Mike Williams is floating in the air and there's stick men all over. I mean, it was all stupid. Like they were all just dumb. And we were all excited. I mean, like they probably spent more on those reshoots than we spent making the whole movie. There's no probably about it. They definitely spent more on the reshoots than we spent making the movie, because we only spent $25K on the whole movie. And like, you know, making the movie, like, you know, I was the production designer. I think that says enough. Like, I'm not really a production designer, but on the reshoots, like, we had a real carpenter come in and build a man-sized stick man for Mike to be crucified on. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and got all the permits and everything. You know, did it all right. And then while we were doing them, we all hated them. And then Ed and Dan, you know, very much to their credit, and probably Greg and Rob and Mike as well, like basically went back to Artisan and said, we don't want to use any of these. And Artisan said at the time, well, we think you're kissing away millions of dollars if you I think they just didn't think the ending that we had was a satisfying ending. You know, I had very little doubt that it was a satisfying ending, because like I'd seen it all along the post process. When they were editing it, I was one of the managers slash projectionists at a movie theater in Orlando called the Enzian. If you ever find yourself in Orlando, it's a fine art house theater. It's still there, and they do great programming there. And because I was one of the managers, I would always ask my boss for permission. But like on a Saturday morning, if I wanted to have a screening of something like such as Blair Witch, they were cool with me doing it as long as I cleaned up. And so we had done 2 screenings of it. The second one was the cut that went to Sundance. And at that point, everybody in Orlando, in the Orlando film community, knew about this thing. And so Enzian, which seated, I think, you know, probably like 200 or 300 people, was packed to the gills. And when you got to that last shot, I knew that it was working because I'd been there when we did it, and I was still all white-knuckled and on the edge of my seat. And it's just because Ed and Dan had done such a brilliant job editing that whole end sequence. And it's like, what does it need? I mean, like, we had talked when we were making the movie, there had been much controversy about what that end shot was going to be. That was probably the only part of it that they didn't really have a strong beat on. And, you know, what we went with, to me, I think just organically comes out of the rest of the movie. But yeah, all these other ideas were just dumb. But like, yeah, we brought Neil's CP16 back, and I brought my. Actually, I think the High 8 camera was already out of commission at that point, because that was Mike's camera at the end of the movie. So it was just the CP16 coming down with the light mounted on it, and it was like, it cuts in fine. You can't tell that it was added later. It's just stupid. All of them are stupid.
The thing that I think is so weird is that, like, one of the big things that people make a point of, because I remember when the movie came out, and people were like, oh, what's happening at the end? It's like, if you listen to the interviews, if you listen to anything said in the movie, if you listen, they explicitly tell you.
Yeah.
You will know. And then by changing the ending like that, not only is it stupid, but it completely removes any of that, then that would be a nightmare for you guys, having to actually cut around that and remove information to maintain any kind of continuity to the ending that they came up with.
No, it was dumb. And to be honest, I don't even know whose idea. I don't know if Artisan said go make them, or if Artisan said, could you just go come up with 5 other endings and just go make them? I don't honestly know. Ed or Dan or Greg could all tell you. But yeah, I mean, maybe I'm rewriting history in my mind because memory is fallible. But if I recall correctly, we all knew that we didn't like any of them when we were shooting them. Like, I think we all thought it was kind of a waste of time, but they were paying us really well to go back to Maryland and do this, and it was like, yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, it was fun for me because I had just moved to L.A. and I wasn't homesick for Maryland because I'm not from Maryland, but it was like kind of getting the old band back together, and Greg and Mike Manello and Rob Cowie and I'd gotten to know Ed while making the movie, so it was just hanging out with all my friends. It was a blast. And Julia, Dan's wife, who wrote Alien Raiders, she was there. It was cool.
That does sound pretty awesome. So despite the insanity, it's like, you know what? You're giving us some extra money and we get to hang out. So yeah. True person.
Well, and honestly, and I can tell you this from my own experience doing all kinds of stuff, sometimes you're wrong when something sounds stupid. I do projection design for theater, and there was a play that I did some projection design for about a year ago called Skullduggery, and it's a musical prequel to Hamlet. It's directed by a guy named Scott Leggett, written by a guy named Michael Shaw Fisher. And at the end of the play, they wanted Hamlet's shadow to come in, and they wanted it cast on the actors. And it was a projection gag, so we were using a movie projector, and I just, filmed the guy against a green screen, kind of opening a door and walking in, and then it blacks out. It's very quick. And when Scott asked me to do it, I'm like, this is not gonna fucking work at all. And it's like, but I got to do it, so because I was doing all the projection design and sound design for the whole play, so it's like, okay, fuck it, go out, shoot the guy against a green screen, go into After Effects, make the shadow gag, blah blah blah, every step of the way. Then we're hanging the projector, and the producer of the play actually owns the projector, and he's up hanging it on the mount on the ceiling. And I was like, hey, Brian, his name's Brian Wallace. I was like, hey, Brian, tilt the projector down a little bit. He tilted it down just slightly, so it wasn't projecting on the actors, but it was projecting on the floor, and it was exactly what the director had wanted. And I was like, God damn it, you were right, Scott, and I was wrong. So, for all I know, one of these goofwad endings could have ended up working and making the movie, a big success. I just think that we all knew what the DNA of the idea was, and it ran counter to the DNA of the idea. But I'm always open to being completely wrong, by the way. So,
well, it's the whole idea of, if you're going to do something low-key and then have something that's right there in the face of the audience, it's like you've kind of taken a tone and contrasted that. It's kind of...
Paranormal Activity gets totally away with it. That is exactly what Paranormal Activity does.
The funny thing is, I hated the ending that they ended up with. I liked the idea. I liked the kind of subtle ending that they had, and then they inserted, like with the studio ending, where it's like, and then she runs at the camera.
Yeah.
And I liked the other one more.
I prefer the original too, but hey, it fucking worked. I mean, I first saw Paranormal Activity. Steve Barton, the publisher of Dread Central, and he and his wife Deb and my wife and I were hanging out in San Diego, and he's like, "Hey, I got to show you this movie." It was like 2 or 3 years before the movie came out. We went and watched a DVD that he had that Oren Peli had personally given him, and it was the original ending, and it was very much like the experience of watching the first Blair Witch. I was completely on the edge of my seat throughout that whole movie. And I thought the original ending worked better than the one that went out theatrically, but hey, it worked for audiences. I also feel like maybe to go with a low-tech ending on that movie would be too much like what we did, and Paranormal Activity is not derivative of Blair Witch at all. It's its own thing, but obviously it was an influence.
True.
Oren Peli will tell you it was an influence. I'm not saying anything out of school.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, it makes sense because you have 2 movies that were done on relatively low budgets and both horror films, and look what happened. It's pretty crazy.
I mean, Oren made his movie for less than we did, and it made more money, and especially if you count all the sequels, way more money.
So, with that, yeah, as we kind of come to a close, is there anything else that you want to talk about, or where can people find you?
Oh man, it's hard to not find me. Once you know I'm out there, I'm on everything. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and usually if somebody is nice about it and asks me to be their friend on Facebook, I'll, as long as they aren't overtly political in a constant way on their feed, I'll usually say yes. But I'm on Twitter at Neptune Salad, and I'm also on Instagram. Some asshole got Neptune Salad, which is me on everything else. So I'm Benjamin_Rock on Instagram. My website is benrockonline.com. I can't get Ben-Rock because before I was even on the internet, some marine supply company called Ben-Rock, all one word, got benrock.com, and even though they don't exist anymore, I can't get that domain. But yeah, I'm all over that stuff. I'm on LinkedIn. Add me everywhere, suckers. The biggest thing that I'm working on now is the web series 20 Seconds to Live, which we did, which Adam Green, Ariscope Pictures, released about 2 years ago, and we just got funded for a second season on Indiegogo. My first experience crowdfunding something, so that was fun. It was actually fun. I'm not being sarcastic.
Yeah.
I had a good time. It was a lot of work. Anyone who thinks that crowdfunding is you put your thing up and then you get free money, it's a lie. You will spend every day of your crowdfunding campaign reaching out to every person you've ever known, but it was worth it. But anyway, so we're going to be doing a second season. We want to make as many episodes as we can, but hopefully it'll be at least 4 or 5 for the second season. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Horror comedy anthology show. The longest episode we have, I think, is like 3.5 minutes. The shortest is like 1.5 minutes.
That's pretty awesome, and I kind of feel bad, man, because this did end up being very much a Blair Witch show, and I've got to tell you, I had a lot of fun having you on here.
Of course.
And because I also kind of feel bad, I would love to do a follow-up where we just talk specifically about the show, especially with you guys working on the second season.
Anytime you want, man, I'll come back. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to talk about Blair Witch. It's funny because I sort of felt like after Blair Witch 2 came out, all the interest in Blair Witch kind of evaporated virtually overnight within culture. And it wasn't really until the Adam Wingard one was announced that people started being interested in it again. I'm glad, I think that the first Blair Witch was everything that we hoped it could have ever. It exceeded all of our expectations, and I'm honestly humbled that that my work might have participated in people's entertainment. 20 years later, that people are still entertained by some goofwad thing made by a bunch of Florida hillbillies out in the Maryland woods. It doesn't get any better than that. Like that might be the extent of it for all of us, but it's still great.
Well, last little note on my end. It proves that if you have a really good idea, and you know what if you got a really good idea, and you know how to do it, you know what you're working with, you don't need $100 million to make something really good, especially it seems in the horror genre.
Yeah, and I think that not that we were setting out to be on the forefront of anything, but I think that. Well, first of all, technology has just kind of gotten to the point where you can own a professional quality camera for not very much money and make great-looking images. So if you have a good script and good actors, and enough money to scrape some shit together, you can actually do great work. But it goes even beyond that. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Tangerine that played at Sundance a couple of years ago. It was like 3 years ago, but they shot it on an iPhone 5S. Like,
I didn't.
Yeah, throw the rules out. There are no rules. When we made Blair Witch, there were companies that were interested in helping finance it, but they wanted us to shoot it on 35 millimeter film because the idea of shooting something on home video was anathema to them, not even realizing that wasn't a bug, that was a feature. But if you see Tangerine, I don't know if it's on Netflix anymore, but that's where I saw it. It's a huge Sundance hit. And it kind of reminds me of like the modern version of like the French New Wave or the Italian neorealists, where they just kind of went out, in this case in Hollywood, but you could do it anywhere, and they just shot on the streets, and you feel like you're really there, and it's because they're shooting on a phone. So, you know, like, I mean, they made it look good enough that you don't care what it looks like. You won't watch it and be like, I can't believe that was shot on a phone. But what it means to me is, if you can find the right story and you can find the medium to shoot it and create it, and to me that's always a net positive.
I kind of want to check this out now.
Yeah, it's very Sundancey, but I you know, it may not be your speed, or you might love it, but it's impressive just that it even got made and that it got into Sundance.
I like that. What was that really weird Michael Fassbender movie where he had the band and he had the big doll head?
I know the one you're talking about.
I like that movie, so I'm pretty sure I'll like this movie.
Yeah. I mean, if you can get into the, I mean, look it up. You'll know by the synopsis if it's your kind of thing or not. I liked it. I thought it was good. And also, it's like so shot in and around like Hollywood and L.A. that I'm like, I wonder if I'm in the background of one of these scenes, just walking down the street somewhere, like, because that's why they shot it on iPhones, was so that they could just shoot it wherever and nobody would notice that they were making a movie.
That's pretty awesome.
I mean, there are other movies like that, like Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal, where it's like, I get gas at the gas station that they get gas at it in Nightcrawler. Like, everything in Nightcrawler, like, I feel like I have been literally every place that movie is. But yeah, I mean, it's I love the place that we're in technologically, and it allows not to, like, to do something like 20 Seconds to Live, kind of just required us to kind of have the initiative to try it, you know, and it didn't start out costing as much as it ends up costing, because, you know, you feature creep your way into having higher standards, but it was still, you know, like, it was something that we could just try out, see if we liked it, see if it turned out well, and then keep going if we liked it, and if it didn't work, you know, delete the cards and move on with our lives. And that's a different world than we lived in back then, you know. I mean, I feel like today you could make, if Blair Witch cost $25,000 to make in 1997, you probably could make it for $10,000 today, or $5,000. Like, a lot of that money went into, like, film stock and processing and transfer and edit suite rentals and stuff like that. Like, you know, stuff that isn't really on the screen.
Yep. So, with that, man, this has been amazing, because
oh, cool, thank you.
When I first saw Blair Witch, I was dumb kid. I was like, I'm 15. What's happening? Well, it's over. And then I watched it about, I'd say, 2 years later, and it's interesting how big a difference 2 years can make, and how much one's taste can change and mature a little bit. And
for sure.
Having you on the show, man, this was just awesome. It was just awesome
thank
to sit
you.
down and talk about it.
Well, thank you so much for asking. I appreciate it.
Yep. And with that, we have the newest episode of Pass the Popcorn. I am Ian McIntosh. It's my special guest, Ben Rock.
Woohoo!
Woo! You all have a great night, and go watch Blair Witch, because it's fucking awesome.
Oh, great. I'm glad my dogs waited till then to start acting weird.
You've been listening to Circuit 42, brought to you by Dragon's Lair San Antonio and Gotham Newsstand. Join us for our next episode. For all things geek.
Circuit 42.